There simply is no story like the story that we celebrate today, the Christmas story. Over the past weeks, we've been reading through the story in narrative form as we have it in the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Matthew. Luke, the medical doctor who probably knew a few things about pregnancy, and Matthew, the tax collector who discovered quite a few things about grace. So we've been reading the story in narrative form with them. But another man tells the story, the Apostle John. John, as it were, steps back from the narrative form of the story and tells it now in poetry. And he does that in what's called the prologue to his gospel, the first word of his gospel. And he gives us this prologue to make sure that when we read the rest of his gospel, we read the story about Jesus correctly. So listen to then John chapter 1, verses 1 to 18. It's poetry. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and nothing has come into being that did not come into being through him. In him was life, and the life was the light of men and women. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John the Baptist. He came for a witness, that he might bear witness of the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but he came that he might bear witness of the light. There was the true light, which coming into the world enlightens everyone. He was in the world was made through him, but the world did not know him. He came to his own, and those who were his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of humans, but of God. And then the key verse. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Eugene Peterson in The Message renders it, and moved into the neighborhood. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. Glory is of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness of him and cried out, saying, This was he of whom I said, He who comes after me has a higher rank than I, for he existed before me. For of his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God at any other time. The only begotten God, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him. My goodness, that is a rich text. In the beginning is this Word. The Logos is the term John uses. In the beginning is the Logos. The Logos is with God. The Logos is God. And then the Logos becomes flesh and dwells among us. John uses this word Logos, or word, because I think he's trying to connect with as wide a scope of human culture as he can. In the Greek world, Logos was used by the philosophers to refer to that which holds all things together, that which integrates reality. In fact, the philosophers would speak of the rational integrating principle of reality. That's what they meant by Logos. In the Jewish world, Logos, or word, would refer to Torah, God speaking to his people, and it would refer to the agent by which God made the world. Through the Word, the worlds were made, the psalmist would say. And John then, stepping back from this Christmas story and reflecting, says, this rational integrating principle has become flesh. This Torah, this Word, has become flesh and dwelt among us. I've been thinking about this text 4 decades at least, and it still stuns me. It's just, what word can I use? Unbelievable. unbelievably believable. Just a wonderful reality. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Now, the church has been trying to find words to express what John has expressed in his poetry for centuries. And interestingly, many people throughout church history have written poetry trying to explicate this mystery. So I thought I would just share some of that with you. Charles Wesley of the 18th century wrote a Christmas carol, Hark the Herald Angels Sing. We probably sung it many times in the past weeks. Christ by highest heaven adored, Christ the everlasting Lord. Late in time behold him come, offspring of the Virgin's womb. Veiled in flesh the Godhead see. Hail the incarnate deity. One of my favorite theologians is Saint Ephraim, or Ephraim of Syria of the 4th century. What's interesting is Ephraim did his theological reflection and his teaching through poetry. All of his work is in poetry. And here's the hymn or poem that he simply called Nativity. And he addresses it to Jesus at Christmas. Your mother is a cause for wonder. The Master entered her and became a servant. He who is the Word entered and became silent within her. Thunder entered her and made no sound. There entered the shepherd of all, and in her he became the lamb, bleating as he came forth. Your mother's womb has reversed the roles. The establisher of all entered in his richness, but came forth poor. The exalted one entered her, but came forth meek. The splendorous one entered her, but came forth having put on a lowly hue. The mighty one entered and put on insecurity from her womb. The provisioner of all entered and experienced hunger. He who gives drink to all entered and experienced thirst. Naked and stripped there came forth from her he who clothes all. Margaret Clarkson, a Canadian of the 20th century, a wonderful hymn writer, writes, Lord of the universe, hope of the world, Lord of the infinite reaches of space, here on this planet you put on our flesh, vastness confined to the womb of a maid. Born in our likeness, you ransomed our race. Lord of the universe, hope of the world, Lord of the infinite eons of time, you came among us, lived our brief years, tasted our grief, our aloneness, our fears. Contemporary songwriters Keith Getty and Stuart Townend put it this way: hands that set each star in place, shape the earth in darkness, cling now to a mother's breast, vulnerable and helpless. C.S. Lewis grapples with this in a lot of different places, but wonderfully so in his children's book, The Chronicles of Narnia. In the last of the 7 books, The Last Battle, these children who are part of the story discover this stable in the land, and the stable is enchanted. They have different experiences around it. It seems then, said Tyrion, one of the characters, that the stable seen from within and the stable seen from without are 2 different places. Yes, said the Lord Diggory, its inside is bigger than its outside. Yes, said Queen Lucy, in our world too, a stable once had something inside that was bigger than the whole world. That's because the Logos, which was in the beginning with God and who was God, became flesh and dwelt among us. What a story. Merry Christmas.